This is the Candid podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. Ever since Donald Trump became the president of the United States a second time in January 2025, the subject of DEI and Trump's major push to eradicate it completely has been an extremely hot button and divisive topic in our society. So, of course, I'm going to have to address it and give you my official stance on the whole DEI topic overall. Before I move any further, for the people who have no clue what the letters DEI actually mean, or what exactly DEI even does, I'll give you the official definition for it. DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, refers to organizational frameworks that promote fair treatment and full participation of all people, particularly those from underrepresented groups or who have faced discrimination. It's a multifaceted concept where diversity refers to the presence of a variety of individuals with different characteristics like race, gender, ethnicity, etc. Equity focuses on ensuring fairness in treatment and access to opportunities, often addressing systemic barriers. Inclusion involves creating a welcoming environment where everyone feels valued and can actively participate. It's basically a policy aimed at getting more minorities, women, and even people from that community into schools, universities, and jobs that these groups have traditionally been excluded from or been severely underrepresented in for various reasons, some intentional and some not intentional. Before I go down the path of discussing my feelings on DEI and whether or not I feel it's something that we still need, I do want to address what I saw that gave me the last nudge that I needed to finally go ahead and produce this podcast. It's going to seem kind of like a side point or a detour, but it's actually all related to this entire DEI conversation because it involves race. So just bear with me for a little bit. I promise I'll get back to the topic at hand, but I really want to discuss this video that I saw a few days ago before I move forward, because I promise that it does tie into points that I'm going to make and discuss a bit later about DEI. So I was scrolling on the podcast episode gift that just keeps on giving, otherwise known as Facebook. And I came across this video of a woman from a Facebook page that was entitled Women of Liberty, which I'm going to assume is a fairly far-right conservative group that produces media strictly focused on supporting everything that Donald Trump says. For full disclosure, I did not do a ton of research on this group because I really don't care that much about the group and their agenda. I care more about this particular video clip, what was said in it, and the reactions in the Facebook comments. Anyway, this video featured a middle-aged white woman who was apparently married to a black man, and they had a biracial child together. The woman talked about how her child was in school, and the teacher started reading the book Black Brother, which is a novel by Jewel Parker Rhodes, about a coming-of-age story about two brothers, one who presents as white, the other who presents as black, and the complex ways in which they're forced to navigate the world, all while training for a fencing competition. During the reading of this novel in school, apparently the white woman's biracial child went and sat outside the classroom because it made him feel uncomfortable. When the teacher went outside to ask the boy what was wrong, he mentioned to her that he doesn't see color and that he never considered himself to be biracial, only that he sees himself as himself. The teacher told him that it was fine if he felt uncomfortable, and apparently the boy did the same thing again the next day when the book reading was resumed, But this time, he was joined by one of his friends/classmates who also said that he didn't feel comfortable with the book reading as well. The white mother was very upset at the whole situation because she said that her and her black husband never discuss race with their children. They don't tell them that whites are bad or that blacks are bad, only that people are people, and that reading books like Black Brother do more harm than good because they're essentially instilling the concepts of racism and racial bias into children who know nothing of those concepts. Let me start off by saying that I do agree with this woman that teaching things like critical race theory, which is essentially the concept that all white people are inherently racist and have it out for black people, and reading things like the Black Brother book to children is highly inappropriate in a school setting. We shouldn't have schools teaching our kids anything about race, racism, and about who's good and who's bad in our society. Those kinds of things should be coming from the parents at home when the timing is appropriate. Of course, I have no issues with history lessons being taught in school, which cover topics like slavery, because slavery actually happened, just like World War I, Vietnam, World War II, and so on. Those are not assumptions or theories based on someone's opinions. They're documented, factual, historical events that should be taught and discussed in a school's history class and in the proper context. With that being said, I do still want to address this Women of Liberty video, as well as what some of the Facebook commenters posted concerning race, which will then nicely segue into my thoughts on DEI. The fact that this white woman and her black husband don't talk to their kid about anything racial at this point in his life is okay, and it's probably how things should be. But she was speaking as if they never had any plans on having that kind of conversation simply because their family just doesn't see race. And that's a very foolish and ridiculous line of thinking. Let's be completely real here. The fact of the matter is that this woman had a biracial child, which for all intents and purposes is a black child in society's eyes. Period. Sugarcoat it all you want to, but the fact of the matter is that the one drop rule is still very alive and well, and it always will be. It doesn't matter how this woman's son views himself. Many people in society will always view him as being black instead of biracial or as just a person. That's not being racist, that's being real. This woman and her husband are going to set this kid up for a very rude awakening if they don't eventually have a conversation with him when he's old enough about race and society. I don't care what goes on inside your home, and I don't care what color you are. You're doing your child an extreme disservice by not educating them on the fact that the entire world doesn't operate like mom and dad does or view you as just a person like mom and dad do. And that goes for every single race. This isn't just for black people specifically. Having a conversation with your child and letting them know that even though race matters nothing inside the four walls of your house, there are inevitably going to be people out in the world that hate you because of the color of your skin. That means white on black, black on white, Asian on white, white on Asian, Mexican on black, black on Mexican, and so on. That's just how some people in the world are. Again, there's nothing wrong with teaching your child to ignore those things and even love on those people, but simply shelling up and denying the mere existence of racism is flat out irresponsible parenting, no matter what race you are. I liken it to the whole topic of sex. Sex used to be something that you never discussed with your kids because it was considered a taboo subject. But now that kids are having sex and getting pregnant more frequently than ever at younger ages, it's imperative that you have some kind of conversation with your kids about sex. Because if you don't, then the streets will. Now, this doesn't mean talking to your kids about sex when they're 10 years old, but once they get high school age, they're going to start hearing about it. So you may as well educate them on it yourself. Again, I'm not saying to throw your kids a pack of rubbers and give them the license to start going to town with some girl or boy. But there's nothing wrong with discussing all the negatives of early sexual activity, generally discouraging sex overall, and encouraging your child to wait before becoming sexually active. But also throwing in the fact that if they decide to disobey your teachings and do whatever they want to, then safe sex is the absolute number one, number two, and number three priority. The fact of the matter is that regardless of what you do or don't teach your kids, there will always be outside influences that end up schooling them on the things that you neglected to. And that brings me to the viewer comments on Facebook regarding this Women of Liberty video on race. Some of you people are straight up living in a fantasy land world, and you all need to wake the hell up. As I said, I do support this mother's stance on the Black Brother book being read to her child in school. But what I saw in the Facebook comments as to why it wasn't okay makes me very afraid for some of you people out there. The main theme that I kept seeing was the fact that racism is taught, and that if we just stop talking about race, it will eventually go away and no one will care. And that's about as buffoonish of a statement I think I've ever heard in my life. The fact of the matter is that we live in a fallen world that is full of corruption, hate, and evil. Simply burying your head in the sand and not talking about race or racism, believing that will magically make things all go away, is absolute clown thinking. I don't give a damn what you teach your kids. No matter what color they are almost definitely going to encounter someone at some point who doesn't like them because of the color of their skin. Shoving your fingers in your ears and loudly yelling, la 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 la, I don't hear these racist comments, or I don't believe racism exists, won't magically make racism go away. As long as this earth exists and continues to spin, some form of racism, sexism, misandry, misogyny, etc., will always exist. A good parent will educate their kids about those things and make sure their child never becomes like that. But simply denying its existence in hopes that all those things will just magically go away is foolish and irresponsible parenting in my book. Also in these Facebook comments, I saw plenty of people making statements that mothers like this are why we don't need DEI. And people complaining that they hate DEI and that if we just don't talk about race at all and stop using that as an excuse, then racism or perceived racism just goes away and all is well. So now that we've officially arrived at the main subject of this podcast, I'm going to share my thoughts from a conservative black man's perspective on DEI as a whole, whether I think we still need it or not, and why I feel the way that I do. I'll start out with clearing up something that most people seem to be grossly misinformed on when it comes to DEI, which is that DEI does not force or promote hiring minorities or women or other kinds of groups over others. Too many of you blind orange man worshipers out there continue to confuse DEI with affirmative action, but I'm here to tell you that those are two completely different things. Affirmative action was a set of policies and procedures designed to address past and present discrimination by giving preference to qualify individuals from underrepresented groups in areas like employment, education, and government contracts. I hope the people all the way in the back heard that one. First things first is that the definition of affirmative action I just read clearly stated qualify individuals. So even if you're not a fan of affirmative action, at least the policy required that the individuals be qualified. Companies weren't, or at least they weren't supposed to be, giving out jobs to minorities who weren't qualified to fill them. But even if you're still against the policy, which I have no issue with you being against, this is something completely different from DEI. And affirmative action is pretty much dead anyway and has essentially been replaced by DEI, which is something that is far more balanced and doesn't favor one race over the other, which is something that all of us supposedly want. The specific definition for how DEI works is that DEI initiatives are not a guarantee of preferential treatment for specific groups, but rather it aims to ensure that no one is discriminated against and that everyone has a fair chance to succeed based on merit. A core aspect of DEI is creating a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and supported. This includes creating safe spaces for open dialogue, addressing biases, and ensuring everyone can participate fully without fear of discrimination or retaliation. And finally, DEI practices are often aimed at enforcing and complying with existing anti-discrimination protections in the workplace, such as those covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So contrary to popular far right-winged propaganda, DEI does not force companies to hire employees based on having to meet some kind of quota, nor does it force companies to hire incompetent minorities over more qualified whites. This is yet another BS Donald Trumpism that has been regurgitated by weak, ignorant people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. I'm sure we all remember when those unfortunate plane crashes happened right as Donald Trump took office for his second term, and the first ignorant and pretty heartless statement that spewed out of his mouth was basically that those crashes were the result of Biden's DEI policies, which Trump had absolutely zero evidence to back up or prove. But it didn't matter. Tons of Trump's ignorant lemming followers latched onto that statement and started their anti-DEI war without having any real knowledge or context behind how DEI works, or even if it was a factor here. Hint, hint, it wasn't. I have talked to more than a few HR specialists, and they have assured me that DEI simply promotes inclusion and ensures that a diverse set of candidates are selected during the interview process for a position. I was told that HR has never been encouraged to lean towards hiring one type of candidate over the other for racial, ethnic, religious, or gender reasons. So all of this talk about how DEI is essentially the same thing as affirmative action is complete nonsense. Now, will there be companies that promote and focus on hiring more diversity than others? Of course there will. Just like there will be companies that promote and focus on hiring less diversity than others. Again, that's just how the world is. To put this into context and give you a great real-world example of how DEI works, let's look at the Rooney Rule in the NFL. The Rooney Rule in the NFL is a rule that forces every NFL team to interview at least one minority coach for an open head coaching position before settling on the final hire. Now, there are 32 teams in the NFL, So as I'm sure you can imagine, it's a very tight-knit and exclusive business. 90% of the time, when a team is looking to hire a new head coach, they already know who they want to hire. But they're still forced to follow the Rooney Rule and give a black candidate a token interview just to satisfy this rule. Even though a lot of black candidates will refuse to interview when it's very clear that the team already has their guy, some black candidates will still go through with the interview because it gives them some exposure for the next head coach hiring cycle. Still, it's obvious this rule doesn't really work as intended in the NFL. But if you look at something like corporate America, where most companies are just pulling candidates from a ton of submitted resumes, something like DEI could legitimately give a minority candidate a real chance at a job they would have been passed on or overlooked for in the past. Now, can companies still treat their hiring processes like NFL teams do with the Rooney Rule? Of course they can, and I'm sure most of them do. But it's still better than not even being given a chance to interview in the first place. Who knows? A minority candidate may even go into an interview, blow the hiring manager away, and dispel some preconceived notions about what kind of person the company thought they actually needed for the position. Now that I've cleared all of that up for you, the listener, and given you the truth on how DEI really operates, does that change your mind on the policy at all? Probably not. And if it doesn't, that's fine. But if you're one of those people who was celebrating the Facebook comments on how race shouldn't and doesn't matter, then you may want to take a look in the mirror and check and see if you're still suffering from a terrible case of hypocrisy. If you're claiming to be someone who's not racist, doesn't see color, and just wants all this racial stuff to end, then you should actually be in support of DEI as it's currently implemented, simply because, as I just stated a minute ago, DEI is aimed at enforcing and complying with existing anti-discrimination protections. Discrimination is wrong because that involves a form of bias. And if you're a person claiming to be against any type of bias towards all people, then you should be celebrating the fact that blacks, whites, Mexicans, Asians, men, women, and everyone in between are all being given an equal shot at the same kinds of opportunities, because that's all DEI aims to do. Blacks and Hispanics combined still only make up slightly over 30% of the U.S. population, compared to the other 60% that's white. Yet it absolutely amazes me, even with that disparity in numbers, that plenty of white people out there still somehow perpetuate the myth that DEI is giving all the jobs to minorities. So you really think that the entire USA can function on 30% of the population working, while the other 60% doesn't because they can't find jobs? And of course, I realize that the entire 30% of US minorities aren't in the working class, but neither are the entire 60% of whites, so the numbers still even out. This country would literally cease to function if all the jobs were given to minorities, simply because there ain't enough of us available to keep ish afloat. So please stop capping on this whole theory that DEI is taking all the jobs from whites and giving them all to minorities, because you sound goofy as hell saying that mess. Let me move on to another fact that some of you may know and some of you may not. Most educated, self-respecting African Americans do not want to be hired because of the color of our skin. I know, it's shocking. Contrary to what you may see on the news every day of lazy black people begging for assistance, aid, food stamps, hell, even reparations, most black people who aren't behaving or thinking like a bunch of ghetto, entitled, ratchet, ignorant fools would absolutely hate to find out that their current job hired them simply because they're black and not because they were the most qualified person for the position. There are a few decent black folk left out there, and we still have some damn pride in ourselves, and we value and cherish our accomplishments. We'd love to live in a world where everyone was treated the same regardless of their ethnicity, religion, racial background, beliefs, and so on. It literally makes us feel devalued as a person to find out that we were hired into a position just to fill a color quota or a gender quota or religious quota, because that makes us feel like our accomplishments weren't good enough for the position, and that only, in this case, the luck of the draw of being black is what gave us the edge in a hiring or admissions process. The only exception to this statement would be a scenario where an all-white company had a hiring process that literally came down to two candidates. Candidate A, who is 95% qualified for the job and white, and candidate B, who is also 95% qualified for the job, but he's black. Both candidates absolutely crushed their interview process, and the hiring team is figuratively split on who exactly to hire. If this all-white company decided to go with the black candidate because he or she was just as equally qualified as the white candidate, but the company felt that going with the black person would shake things up a bit and offer a new and fresh perspective from someone with a different background, then I could understand that. And if the reverse happened in an all-black company, I would support that as well. You're not less qualified than the person you beat out, but maybe you coming from a different background will allow you to bring ideas and thought patterns that will help push the company in new directions. As a black person, that wouldn't bother me at all. If candidate A was 95% qualified for the position and candidate B was 94% qualified, but the company went with candidate B anyway because he or she was black, then I'd have an issue with that. But with all things being equal, most people grow in life by moving outside of their comfort zones and pushing their boundaries, and companies are no different. It's very possible for both candidates to have answered the interview questions perfectly, but maybe the black person answered them with a different line of thinking than the white person did due to a completely different upbringing or social experiences, and the company felt that line of thinking could benefit them in some way. Who knows? Bottom line is that coming from an African American, we don't want to be hired simply because we're black, especially when we're underqualified. But I personally embrace my unique perspective on things, which is partially driven by my race, being something that a company would welcome, especially if it gives me the edge over someone else. And people of other races should feel the exact same way too. What I want to move on to next is what too many black people still experience to this day, and why most feel like DEI is still very necessary. And that's us not being hired, promoted, or accepted to a school or club because we're black. Sorry, white folks, but I talked about this one in a previous podcast. If you want to completely eradicate the letters DEI and get rid of the policy as a whole, then you need to start playing fair and holding yourselves accountable during the hiring process, which unfortunately, too many white people still do not do. Now, don't get me wrong. Things are better now than they've ever been in the past when it comes to African Americans being given equal opportunities to interview for positions. But we still have a ways to go. Two examples of what I'm referring to immediately come to mind. And one is a blatant example of racism, while another is an example of how bias can affect African Americans even when white people are not purposely or actively trying to be biased. I talked about both of these in the previous podcast, so I won't go into great detail here again, and I'll keep things brief. The first example is something all of us African Americans have experienced quite frequently, and that's the old resume name switch. It happened to someone recently, and he ended up suing the company for bias. Long story short is that we take our perfectly qualified resume that we've been submitting to jobs and keep getting rejected left and right, and simply change the name to something more Caucasian sounding, and magically we start getting more responses. I've done it many times in the past and even started documenting it at one point. In my podcast where I spoke on this issue, I estimated that my uptick in responses was about 20%. But now that I look back, to be quite honest, it was probably even higher than that. Either way, at the end of the day, there's absolutely no excuse for a name change on a resume resulting in a significant increase in responses unless there's some real funny business going on. And I think we all know what I mean by that. The second example that I'll give is something that white people in corporate America continue to push very strongly, which is the phrase that it's not what you know, it's who you know. Again, this philosophy basically takes all of the emphasis off of hiring or promoting the best person for the job and puts it strictly on relationship building and buddying up with people just for the purposes of career advancement. With most of the US workforce being white, who do you think this is going to benefit the most? Again, I'm not saying that this kind of thing is being encouraged to squeeze African Americans out of the workforce, but it does hurt us the most. As I said a minute ago, I spoke about this in a different podcast, highlighting how, even at work, people are going to naturally form bonds more quickly with coworkers who are similar to them. Indian people often sat and ate with other Indians because their cultural backgrounds were the same. They didn't hate anyone at all, but they just naturally formed stronger bonds amongst themselves more quickly than with any other group. And the same goes for blacks and whites. Now, does that mean that none of us ever interacted with each other? Of course not. But people from similar backgrounds will always form bonds much easier than people from dissimilar backgrounds. That's just how life goes. Now, if we look at how this works in a corporate American workplace, it's pretty hard to deny how the old "it's not what you know, it's who you know" phrase is more damaging to minorities than anyone else. We're naturally going to have a harder time forming bonds with people who are in the majority, which in turn is going to make it even more difficult for us to get hired or promoted. Now, that may not be an intended consequence of putting more worth into who you know over what you know, but that's where we're at. When all is said and done, the bottom line to this entire point is that whether it's on purpose or just the result of terrible policies or practices, even though self-respecting black people don't want to get hired because of the color of their skin, we also don't want to be denied employment or rejected because of the color of our skin either. We simply want to be given the same opportunities and treatment as other qualified candidates are. But the simple reality is that while, yes, things are better than they've been in the past, they're still not exactly where they need to be. So things like DEI have been implemented to help ensure that we're at least being included and given a fair shot at the same opportunities. If the company hires or promotes someone of another color who they think is legitimately more qualified, then so be it. We're not looking for handouts, just fairness. Obviously, you can see that I have absolutely no issue whatsoever with DEI. And that's because I promote equality and fairness for all people. And I see DEI as nothing but a positive as long as it's implemented as intended. I've had the chance to work at some very diverse companies, so I'm going to give you just a few of the positives of being in a diverse environment that I've experienced firsthand. Now, I'm not saying being in these diverse environments were directly because of DEI policies. I'm just sharing some of the positives that can come out of it. Enhanced decision making is a huge benefit from being in a diverse environment. Diverse teams bring a wider range of perspectives and experiences, leading to more comprehensive and innovative solutions. I talked about this a bit earlier. Working with people from all different kinds of backgrounds not only helps you learn more on your job and bring fresh ideas to the table, but it also helps you learn more about the world and people around you. And why is that such a bad thing? Being able to interact with Indian people at my job and learn a bit about their culture, food, etc., didn't really impact my job at all, but on a personal level, it helped me better understand a group of people that I've never really interacted with before. On a professional level, I can personally attest that some of the best ideas have often come from having a bunch of people in the room together from many different walks of life, backgrounds, and races, because everyone brought a different perspective that maybe the person next to them never thought of before. A lot of the times things can stagnate or become redundant when you're constantly talking to and collaborating with people who have the exact same kinds of thoughts, ideas, and background as you do. Does that mean that every single time I've been in a diverse group that it was all rainbows and sunshine? Of course not. But the positives definitely outweighed the negatives in my opinion, especially when it came to the decision-making process. Greater innovation and creativity is kind of similar to the decision-making point, but still another positive that I've seen. Diverse teams are better at solving complex problems and generating innovative ideas as they challenge assumptions and consider multiple viewpoints. Like I said, this one is kind of similar to the one above, but it doesn't make it any less true. There are many of times that myself and a fellow African American may have come up with a new idea, solution, or workaround, and something that we may have experienced in our background helped us come up with it. A great example will be something that we felt could be a security risk. Oftentimes, people in the room with us grew up in a different kind of environment. Let's just say a safer environment. So our coworkers were naturally more trusting of people because they didn't have to deal with as much crime as my friend and I did. Now, I'm not going to get into what kind of industry I was in, so I'll remain somewhat vague here. But oftentimes when questions of security came up, my friend and I would be pushing for more security while others would be pushing for less. Sometimes the push for less security may be due to certain constraints like time or resources, but my friend and I would always try to find a creative or innovative way to add in another layer of security simply because we just don't trust people as much as others did. Most of the time, people would praise our ideas and say, "I never would have thought of that." And that's because maybe due to their experience in life, it's not something they've ever had to think of. Whereas my friend and I were forced to do it all the time. So it's pretty routine for us. The last positive that I'll talk about is improved financial performance. Now, I'll keep this one fairly brief because I'm not going to lie and say that I have deep knowledge of this or have personally experienced this one at all. But apparently studies have shown that companies with diverse leadership teams are more likely to achieve financial success. Given the other 2 points that I just discussed, this one kind of comes as a no-brainer. It's pretty much trending in the same direction of people from very diverse backgrounds being able to come together and problem solve, which usually ends up with better results, a better product, and so on. The more diverse your company is, the better your problem solving is going to be, which results in a better overall product. Hell, even diversity in the finance department or on the leadership team could help companies find more creative ways to save money, reduce overhead, and increase revenue. Whatever the case may be, most of you people out there love you some stats and numbers when it fits your narrative, so you can't run away from this one or try to downplay it. I think that I can safely say that, universally, no matter what color you are or what kind of background you come from, We all want to make as much money as humanly possible, and the numbers show that diversity in the workplace is one of the main keys to achieving that goal. I was just about to wrap up this podcast, but one final quick point popped into my head that I thought was pretty funny. Let's just be completely real here. The stereotype of black people is that we're all lazy, don't want to work, and content to live on welfare and aid instead of trying to find a job and work like good, honest people do. But when a policy like DEI is put into place that doesn't favor black people or guarantee us anything but a seat at the table, then all of a sudden everyone is up in arms complaining how unfair it is and pretending like DEI is taking all the jobs away from the majority. Fair is fair here. I've gotten on black people countless times for being ghetto, foolish, race baiting, and acting like a bunch of gutter trash buffoons. But I gotta call out BS from other races too. It's at the point now where even black people who are trying to do the right thing and simply want equal opportunities to earn a living are being hated on too. This whole DEI debate really does feel like the classic damned if you do, damned if you don't type of scenario for some of us. So now I guess I'll officially end things here. I'm sticking with what I said in the title of this podcast. If you're some red-blooded conservative that's all about America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, and you champion that this country is built on fairness and equality, then you shouldn't have an issue with something like DEI. And if you do, you're probably a closet racist or bigot. Period. And if you're a black person against the concept of DEI, then you're probably one of those black people who constantly caters their opinions to white people in order to gain their favor, even when white people are wrong. So I have no respect for you either. Get mad all you want to, but I see nothing wrong with a policy that encourages inclusion and equal opportunities for all without favoring one side over the other. As I said earlier in the podcast, if more companies run by white people automatically played by the DEI playbook without us having to actually create and institute a DEI policy, then this whole conversation would be about nothing. The problem is that while steps have been made, there are still too many companies out there that won't even give minorities an opportunity to interview with them, let alone hire a person of color. And the fact of the matter is that the same people sticking their head in the sand, trying to pretend that racism and unfair hiring practices don't exist, or are constantly crying, "I'm tired of all this DEI and equality crap," are the exact same people who forced the creation of DEI policies in the first place. I've made this statement once already, but it still bears repeating. Most self-respecting, professional, and level-headed African Americans and minorities are not asking to be interviewed, hired, or promoted because of the color of our skin. But we also don't want to be denied any of those things because of our melanated appearance either. As always, if you're listening in on YouTube, I appreciate a like, a subscribe, or you leaving a comment. I'm continuing to try to bring you great content, and I hope that you enjoy the kind of podcast that I'm bringing to you. Thanks for listening in. I will catch you on the next one.